Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. I was just going to go through pretty quickly a Vedic astrology analysis for the attack that just happened on Moscow today. This is 22nd of March, 2024. And if you've watched my other videos, recent videos on March 2024 transits, and also my last video was the Lunar Eclipse coming up on Monday. In some ways, this shouldn't be, the attack today probably shouldn't be much of a surprise, but we'll go through it. If you've watched any of my videos, you know I can talk on for hours, but this is going to be fairly short just to give a fairly brief rundown of why this happened in Moscow. Okay, so we have two charts here. On the left, we have a sun rising chart for Moscow. And on the right, we have news of the attack. So this was the moment when I heard of the attack. I was just rolling around online and saw the news, and so I found the information on the founding date, or what's considered the founding date for Moscow. And then I drew up what's called a samaya chart, which is we consider it an update chart of the karma for, like, we would do this with a person. Again, I tend to look at people, places, and moments in history and that sort of thing. So that's what we have here on the left and the right. So let's just take a look at the sun rising chart from Moscow. The time and date, the date that I used here was April 4th, 1147. This is generally considered to be the main founding time of Moscow. There was evidence of civilization there before, but this was a critical moment in Moscow history. And this is a sun rising chart, so this is not an Udaya Lagna, it's a Surya Lagna. A Udaya Lagna would be kind of a rising sign chart. Okay. Now the thing is, since I don't have an exact birth time or moment for this day, I can't really do an Udaya Lagna without knowing deeply the history of Moscow, which I don't. And the thing is, if you can't do Udaya Lagna, sunrise or sign rising chart, you can potentially do a moon rising chart because that's the next slowest moving feature of a chart. But you can see that the moon here is very close to the line of Aries and Taurus. If you're not familiar with Vedic astrology, before I get too deep into this, I use North Indian style charts in my work. So this is a North Indian style chart. And at the top middle here, this diamond, this is what would usually be the sun or the sign rising position or the ascendant first house, that sort of thing. But I've shifted it to make the sun in the rising house. Okay. So we can get some information for Moscow here. So you can see, though, that the moon here is on very close, just 5.5 degrees into the sign of Taurus. Let's see, in the rising sign, typically the first house here, we have a little one in the bottom corner. That little one signifies the first sign of the zodiac, which is Aries or Mesha in Sanskrit. So in North Indian style charts, we count backwards. Okay, so in the second house here, which happens to have a little 2 in the corner, bottom corner, the 2 does not refer to the house number, it refers to the constellation number. So the second constellation of the zodiac is Taurus or Vrishaba in Sanskrit. Okay, so very brief information here about Moscow. So the moon nakshatra, and the nakshatra is a lunar mansion. Every night the moon shifts positions, so there are 27 functional nakshatras. And so every night the moon is in a different nakshatra. So if you have 27 nakshatras and the moon passes through and it takes the moon 27 nights to go through, that gives you a lunar month. Okay. Now, the moon nakshatra in this Moscow chart is mostly in Kritika for this day. So from midnight in the morning until 8:10 p.m. on this day, April 4th, 1147, the moon is in Kritika nakshatra. So the symbol of Kritika nakshatra is actually Kartikeya, which is the great celestial military leader. He was celebrated, very victorious. It also, even though most people know Kritika for that, and even another symbol for Kritika is like a sharp instrument, like a knife. So again, more military and potentially violent or fiery type of energy. Um, the other side of Kritika, it's actually dual nakshatra, where the other side of Kritika is a very nurturing energy because Kartikeya was raised by several foster mothers. So yeah, so most of the day, so unless Moscow was officially decreed, after 8 o'clock in the evening, then most of the day Moon would have been in Kritika nakshatra. So the other thing is that, so that's good to know because again, that brings this military nurturing energy, which when I look at the chart a little bit more, you'll see that that's repeated in different ways. So we have confluence of that moment in time when Russia was sort of made formally a very important city. So the Mahadasha means the great planetary period that was occurring at the time of the sun rising chart from Moscow. And the Mahadasha, for the most part of the day, so again, from midnight until 8:10 in the evening, the major period of this time would have been the sun. Okay, now the sun represents different things like authority, government leadership, the king, the president, these sorts of things. And you can see, again, the sun is in the rising house here, the first house, but the sun happens to be in Aries, where it's exalted. The other thing is that you have Mars in the seventh house aspect, and you can follow a red arrow from the seventh house, which is opposite of the first house, up to Sun and Mercury. So Mars represents the military leader, like the CEO or commander in chief. So there was a lot of strong military strength by setting Moscow as an important city at this time. Okay, at the, again, what most people consider the formal birth time of Moscow. So you can see that, and that's true for Moscow, even today, even though this is what, how many thousands, almost a thousand years ago. So the other thing that's, important here. So that's obvious from the beginning that we have Mars and Sun, the two kind of leadership planets, and also fiery planets in the rising sign. So that'll give a flavor or tone, set the tone for the rest of the chart. The other thing is you see in the second house, I have this circle here where we have 5 planets: Venus, Rahu, Moon, Jupiter, Saturn, and we do actually have Mars aspecting, shining its light, its energy into the second house as well. So you basically have the energy of 6 different planets in the second house. Okay, now what's very nice about the second house is that 4 depends on where the moon is. So again, if the moon, if the moon was in Kritika, the other 4 planets would have been in Rohini Nakshatra. Rohini Nakshatra, symbolized by a ox cart. But Rohini, that star in the sky, that place in the sky, is considered to be the most attractive, luscious, nurturing, artistic, kind of energy. And so to have 4 planets there in that part of the sky is astounding. And so the other thing is the second house is related to things like family, but also material wealth. So not only was Moscow important as a military city when it was founded, but there was a lot of wealth here. The other thing is in this Taurus, Venus rules Taurus and it's there. So Venus is in its own sign. So that means that all these planets are, ruled or dominated by Venus, which is about art, which is about culture, which is about socializing, about compassion, about diplomacy. The other thing is besides having Venus in its own sign, we do have Moon in Taurus, and Moon is exalted in Taurus. So, and Venus and Moon are the 2 emotion planets. So, we also have Jupiter there, which gives a lot of expansion and growth. We have Rahu there, the north node of the moon, which gives, even though it gives some kind of shadow aspects, like some unknowns, which, whoever knows, when you're building a city, if it's going to survive and for how long and what the outcome's going to be. There is ambition here as well. And then we also have Saturn here. So there was like Saturn and Rohini, I typically see in charts of people who are like architects or sculptors. because Saturn represents structure and longevity and antiquity. So there's a lot of great energy here in the second house. So I can already see by looking at the chart without knowing anything else about, the history of Moscow or Russia, that I can understand why this was a time that a city like this was founded or kind of officialized. And then the Mars energy aspecting there. Mars, I believe. Um, Hold on just a second here. Yeah, I just wanted to double check. So the thing is that Mars is retrograde in the seventh house. The seventh house represents things like independent business as well as partnerships of different kinds. So Mars is retrograde, which gives it strength. And but the thing is, Mars is in part of the sky called Swati and Swati Nakshatra, and Swati is symbolized by new grown grass blowing in the wind. So it's this kind of fragile, burgeoning time. So this is fragile, burgeoning time. Military leaders in the house of partnerships. And then the thing is now Sun, even though it's very strong in the first house, when you bring it into the seventh house here, which is ruled by Libra, the Sun is debilitated in Libra. So you have military partnerships that are fairly fragile and unstable from the get-go, from the beginning of the Moscow time. So the other thing to note about this chart um, uh, is that this big circle here of all these lovely planets, these are all aspecting into the opposite house of the eighth house. And the eighth house is about, deep psychology. So the time of the founding of Moscow, at this time, there was a lot of great military ambition and protection, but also artistic vision and longevity. So I can see why Moscow was, brought into being at this time. Um, the thing though is that, again, the other thing about this circled piece here is that you have the moon with Saturn. Okay, so in Vedic astrology, we would consider this to be a sati sati. Sati sati is a 7.5 year period where Saturn goes through the constellation before the moon, through the moon, and then after the moon, because Saturn goes through each sign or constellation in about 2.5 years. So if you go through 3 signs before, of, and after the moon, that's 7.5 years. Sati Sati is not considered to be it's not always bad, but it brings a lot of turmoil and change. It can bring a lot of mental, emotional turmoil into somebody's life, usually because there's a loss of support of a support system, a very important support system in somebody's life. So if this is a person, for example, and they're going through their first sati sati, and you go through sati sati every 29 years, because that's how long it takes Saturn to go through the whole zodiac. Um, so usually when people go through their first sati sati, they might lose support system, like maybe their grandparents. And then the second sati sati they go through, they might lose their parents, that sort of thing. So even though there's a lot of potential here in this chart, you're also seeing, some mental, emotional turmoil, sadness, because Saturn can represent things like anxiety, doubt, skepticism, isolation, that sort of thing. So even there's all this beautiful energy with Venus being in its own sign and Moon being exalted and Jupiter there and Rahu, and there's all this ambition there. You can also see that there's signs of instability, mental and emotional instability. Okay. So again, then if we move on to, so that's the kind of founding energy of Moscow. Then if we move to the chart on the right here, this is the time of the news of the attack, and this is the time that I heard about the attack. So, and I found the information on Moscow. So again, this is what we call a samaya chart or an update chart. So it gives kind of an updated energy for the chart that we're analyzing. Okay, so you can see in this chart, I can't actually do Udaya Lagna, a sign constellation rising chart, because I have an exact time. So I heard the news 21:29 in the evening Eastern Standard Time on the 22nd of March 2024. So the day lord was Venus at this time, and the hour lord, Hora lord, was Venus. So Venus is already very important, and Venus represents the arts. So if you heard about the news, actually the place that was specifically attacked in Moscow was a music or dance hall performing arts venue. Okay, and then the current to Shah period, so the planetary period of this exact moment was Venus, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury. So again, a lot of Venus, again, the arts, compassion, sociability. And Jupiter here is a planet of expansion. And you can also see that Venus, besides representing the arts and stuff, Venus is the ruling planet for the Lagna here, the Adaya Lagna, because it's a Libra seven, that little seven in the corner, bottom corner, is the seventh constellation of the zodiac, which is Libra. And Libra is ruled by Venus. Okay. So that means that Venus, specifically the first house, which is the general gestalt again of a person or a place, like a country or a city, and it represents not only the physicality of that person or place, but it represents the psychology of that person or place. Okay. So you can see that Venus is very heavy here. The other thing is that Venus is the lord of the eighth house here of deep psychology. So you can imagine some kind of attack like this is going to reverberate deeply within the top level psychology as well as the deep level psychology of people and again the city. So that's why Venus, I think, is already coming up several times, right? Day Lord, Hour Lord, Mahadasha, the major planetary period, and then the first sub period, the Antara. Then we have Jupiter and Mercury. Jupiter happens to be in a nakshatra called Bharani. Bharani is symbolized by a womb. So yeah, the womb, the energy of that area of the sky is all about cycles of life and death. So that's pretty relevant here. Um, and the thing is that Jupiter usually is considered, and it is considered to be the great benefic planet. So you might think, well, why isn't Jupiter kind of helping the chart more? And it is helping the chart, but the thing is that you have this massive Saturn in its own sign of Aquarius aspecting Jupiter. And since Saturn is so strong, and Saturn again is the planet of delays and obstacles and doubts, insecurities, anxiety, depression, all these things that most people don't want. And it's also like a long-standing planet. It symbolizes things that are long-standing because it's the slowest moving planet. This massive Saturn is aspecting onto Jupiter, so it's really dragging Jupiter down. And Jupiter again is a planet of optimism and beneficence and charity and fairness and justice. And so this massive Saturn is dragging on Jupiter. The other thing to note is that you can see that Saturn and Venus are almost within a degree of each other. So literally just a few hours before this, and I don't know, maybe because I heard about this, maybe I don't know when the exact attack, what time of the exact attack happened, but the thing is that until about 4:30 p.m. my time, and who knows how long it took, who knows how long it took the news to come out, but it could very well be that Saturn and Venus were in the same degree. What happens when you get to true planets, like Saturn and Venus in the same degree, is you get what's called a planetary war. And that's going to stabilize both planets as well as the houses that they represent and the houses that they own. So Saturn, super strong, aspecting on Jupiter, was debilitated, or not debilitated, but destabilized the last couple of days because it's in a war with Venus. Saturn also happens to be in a part of the sky called Shatabisha, which is translated as 100 healers. So when you have Saturn in that part of the sky, you can often get like diseases and things like that that are hard to heal or cure, or that, especially chronic diseases, because Saturn represents chronic diseases. But the other thing is Saturn is in Aquarius. Aquarius is what we call a fixed air sign. So fixed means things that are not flexible, really. And an air sign tend to be ideas. So this is like ideology that is fixed and hard to cure and hard to, find and deal with. And so that's essentially what's coming through here. The fifth house also represents stage and performing arts. So that's very relevant again. The other thing is that the fifth house represents counseling. So again, what we're getting is this massive Saturn that's destabilized because it's at war, you know, almost at the time, if not at the time of the attack. And it's in Shatabisha, so something that's very hard to fix. So this attack, at least ISIS, a terrorist group, claimed responsibility for the attack. So, again, we're talking about ideology that's hard to fix or cure or treat or deal with, handle. Um, Basically destabilizing relationships for Moscow, because Saturn, when it aspects into the house that Jupiter's in, which is Aries, Saturn is debilitated in Aries. So in so many ways, this really super strong Saturn just went, berserk, essentially. The other thing I have in here, we have Mars also in the mix here. Mars is going to bring again a military energy, of potentially violent energy. Mars happens to be in Dhanishta nakshatra. Dhanishta is symbolized by a drum. And so that part of the sky is all about like rhythm and beat. And you could actually potentially think of music here. When you have Mars and Venus together that are related to Dhanishta, you could get dance as well. So I'm guessing that there were dance performances there, but I don't know for sure. But I would guess just from this. When you have Mars and Saturn together, you get things like architecture. So there you have it: music, dance, architecture, stage, performing arts, unstable advice or counseling, fixed ideology, that sort of thing. Okay, so then we also have aspecting into the fifth house is its moon and from the 11th house. You can see that purple moon with the long arrow. The moon represents the public, can represent the public, and the 11th house represents clubs, groups, societies. So this is like the public, you know, public places, public groups. The other thing is the moon is in the nakshatra of Purva Falguni, which is all about enjoying the finer things of life, like the arts and music and things like that. So you have public performances of the arts and architecture. So you can see clubs, group, society. You can see how this axis is really important for this moment in time. So the other thing is that, again, if you've seen my other videos, again, analysis from March 2024, and then the lunar eclipse coming up on Monday, I actually mentioned that there was probably somewhere in the world going to be, unfortunately, some attack, vengeance, because I did a video on the attack of Israel at the beginning of October, and at that moment in time, we had Mars crossing K2. Can be a very erratic, violent, aggressive planet, especially when it's stabilized. And K2 is sort of like Mars, but even more of a twist, even more erratic, even more, unstable and unpredictable. And right now, actually, we have Mars aspecting the house in which K2 is in. So K2 is in the 12th house of loss and expenditure. So you could see that literally when you have Mars aspecting K2, there's some sort of explosion that created loss for the town of Moscow. In addition to that, you can see in the 6th house here, 6th house has that little 12 in the corner. If you look at the lower, left side, you'll see Sun, Rahu, Mercury. So you can see in the 6th house here, we're building up to that lunar eclipse that's happening on March 25th, Monday, in 3 days. So the thing is that the 6th house represents the house of enemies. It's called the Shatrusthana, literally the house of enemies in Sanskrit. So the thing is that you have here Sun. Sun is a government. Rahu is the north node of the moon that can represent ambition. Rahu is in a part of the sky called Revati. Revati is all about kind of travel and hospitality. So there's a twist on that, and there's kind of this long distance or foreignness that is associated with Rahu. So foreign government, foreign entity, or some sort of authority if it's not a formal, kind of land or country or something. Then you have Mercury here, which is debilitated in Pisces. So Mercury represents things like logic, analysis, communication, travel, organization, that sort of thing. So all these things are going to be scrambled with Mercury being in Pisces in the sixth house. So this is like a foreign authority who's, you know, not necessarily, um, I would say, being the most rational or logical about their actions, because again, Pisces is a dual water sign, so it's all about, it's almost like the ocean, different waves. And so Mercury doesn't necessarily do that great because it's a logical analytical planet. It's kind of like trying to almost rationalize the emotions or the decisions that are being made here. Um, but you can also see from that house, the sixth house, is that, there's instability, building, growing, and then, again, it's building, into the uh, up into the lunar eclipse that's happening on Monday, the 25th. So, the sixth house, the house of enemies, is not looking very stable, which is again in a different way recreating the chart, sun rising chart from of Moscow in 1147. And even the, to back up a little bit, the Mars, Saturn, Venus with the moon, that's essentially what you have in the second house of Moscow. You have Mars, Moon, Saturn aspected by Venus, Moon, Saturn in the second house aspected by Mars, and then on top of that you have Rahu and Jupiter. So you do have a bit of a recreation here. And then you don't have Sati Sati, but you do have Saturn, this massive Saturn, destabilized Saturn, very strong but destabilized Saturn, um, and very passionate, especially Mars, Saturn, and Venus together. Those are three passion planets. So this is a massive passion combination. So it's just the sentiments of, the enemies here got the better of them. And, they decided to take action that was probably not the most rational. Yeah, so you can see in different ways you're recreating the Moscow chart here, at least the energies of them. So what else did I put here? So also to note, besides the planetary war destabilizing Venus and Saturn, the other thing to note is in this chart, because we do have an exact time of when I heard the news, I could find the Chitra grahas, which are the planets of vulnerability. I have a whole video on that if you want to learn more. But they are Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Moon. So of those, Jupiter is aspecting the Lagna. So when you have a Chitra graha, it can actually show, even if it's a strong planet or a benefic planet, it can be a planet that sort of like an Achilles heel, like kind of a soft spot or weak point for somebody or something. So you have a weakness in the Jupiter that's aspecting, potentially protecting, the Lagna and the whole chart and the whole city. But again, you have this massive destabilized Saturn, dragging on Jupiter, and then Jupiter has this, vulnerability point. So Jupiter can't give as much of its beneficence to this moment in time. The other thing is Mars, Venus, and Moon. So those are the, Mars and Venus are in the fifth house here, and then Moon. So three of the four planets that are, involved with energy of the fifth house are vulnerability points. So, that's an attack point, essentially. It was a public stage. You can, read it very literally that way. So with, again, just sort of summarizing some of the notes on this Samaya chart, life and death because of Jupiter's position, unstable relations because you have this massive Saturn, debilitated in the seventh house of relationships, ambitious, unstable enemies because of the sixth house here, loss of property through explosion, that's Mars aspecting K2 on the 12th. And then this is all related to a building of public art performance. This Moon, Venus, Saturn, Mars combination on the 5-11 axis. Okay. So anyway, I hope that's, useful or interesting to people to learn some astrology. Unfortunately, Even if you listen to my March 2024 analysis for the month, I was saying I think something's going to blow up, and I hope I'm really wrong. And I still wish that I had been wrong, but here we are. So, but anyway, I really wish the best to all the people involved, especially all the innocent people who are just bystanders in this moment of time. So, there you have analysis of this moment in time. Again, a very fragile and potent moment. Um, I do post a lot of teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology, so they're all on my concepts playlist if you're interested. But otherwise, I hope you're all doing well, and I hope that again, this eclipse coming up on Monday, um, because it involves both the moon and Mercury, there is going to be, unfortunately, a lot of mental, emotional turmoil coming up. So be very kind to yourselves, do your best to be kind to others, and let's all try to get through it as best we can, okay? So take care, and until the next one, namaste.